Good morning, and welcome to the Comix Experience Graphic Novel of the Month Club for the month of March 2018. Our book this month is My Summer with the Hawaiian Fire Goddess. And I'll put it on that camera too. And we're very, very pleased to have the author, Kent Silvera, here. Hi, Kent, or should I say aloha, I suppose.
Aloha.
Yeah, there you
Thank you for having me.
Absolutely.
This is
Thanks
awesome.
for coming, man. Thanks for coming.
It's awesome.
Good to have you. Did you guys, in the audience, you guys read the book, right? Did you like it?
Woohoo!
Yeah? Yeah? Cool.
Okay.
All right, awesome. That's what we want to hear. That's what we want to hear. So, this is a cool book. This is a very cool book, Ken, I thought. And,
Mahalo.
right on. And the place I always start, the question I always start with is why comics? What do you like about comics? Why comics?
I've loved comic books since my grandparents are all about this book. They are the reason I love comic books. My grandmother, I grew up in Palo Alto. My grandmother worked at the Stanford Hospital, the kids hospital, and she would bring home comics from the little gift shop she worked at every day for me to read. And I just grew up falling in love with any kind of sequential, like narrative fiction. I loved cliffhangers. I think I loved Speed Racer, the cartoon series, because there was the only cartoon show that had parts 1 and parts 2, and I'd be so excited to see the next chapter. So I always felt like the stories were a lot more sophisticated than anyone gave them credit for. And I think you see that now with all the movies coming out. Sure. And I'm like, these people are like, these are great, these are wonderful. And I'm like, these are all the comic books you were saying were just kid stuff back in the 70s and the 80s. And those are all those storylines. They're modern mythology to a certain extent, where you've got this idea that these people with superpowers and are playing and they can help the helpless and stand up for people who can't stand up for themselves. And they're great role models. I think they're just inspirational, especially to kids. And you stand up to bullies in the playground and you see how they would handle things and you try to inhibit that spirit.
Sure.
Yeah.
Very
no,
cool.
and it was both. It was entertaining and it was a good example, I think.
Yeah. So your earliest memories of comics then are superhero comics, it sounds like, specifically.
Oh yes.
Yeah,
yes.
Marvel and DC superheroes, yeah.
I think it's I think it was a very complicated world where the first comic book I ever got was the one where Cary Bates, the guy who wrote the issue, meets the Flash, his creator.
Oh yeah.
I was like, and I've always been fascinated by that concept.
Sure.
Like, how can a creator meet what he just created?
Yeah.
So,
and the multiple Earths and the
and
Earth that's actually our Earth, but there are no superheroes in it. Yeah, comics are funny and strange. Did you have a comic?
Yes, they are funny and strange.
Oh, I thought you had a comic, that's all.
Yeah.
No, you. I was looking at you. Yes. It's all good. Don't worry. Well, that's super cool, man. That's super cool. So, have you always wanted to do comics?
Yes, I love comic books. I've had the opportunity to work with other people who work with comic books, and Scott Sava, who did Dreamland Chronicles, which you have in your store or had, and his new movie, which is Animal Crackers, coming out. You have the movie adaptation. So I knew Scott because his sister was in a Bible study with me, and so we met down in Los Angeles, and he was starting Dreamland, and he asked me to help him because he knew I liked writing stories. I was a film major at UC Santa Barbara. He was an artist and he wanted someone to help him write. And I ended up helping him, kind of being story editor for him at Blue Dream Studios. And he heard about this story idea, which was something I'd wanted to do for a while, or just it popped up. And he said, I know an artist I can hook you up with, Diego Jordan. He's great, he's wonderful. And Scott got me, connected us together. But long before that, I had been applying to be an assistant editor at Malibu Comics. And Scott and his wife, Donna, both worked there, and so we kind of had that connection. And that was fun. They were like, why do you want to work here? You already work at an animation studio. I'm like, I know, animation's cool, but it takes so long to make one movie. In comic books, you get to make a story every month.
Sure.
You know, and you can go anywhere, and you don't have to worry about the budget. And
that was actually going to be my next question. Was going to be, with your background in animation, what are the differences between making a comic and making an animated film?
That is, You know, in comic books, you are looking at a static image. I always refer to it like Scott McCloud's book, Understanding Comics, which you as a reader, you're in control of the time. You're in control of what you read, how fast you read it. I mean, the pages kind of give you that sense of timing, but you're still using your imagination. The same, not as much as with a book, but you're using it to fill in the gaps in between each of those panels. And in my head, as a kid, I would always read these, and I would start doing the dialogue aloud, and I would start saying it. I would start making my own little radio podcasts of comic books, and I'd do all the character voices. And I love that because I could kind of take some ownership of it, if that makes sense. Like I could hear things, and I could play act the different characters. And in animation, you are in animation you have to fill in all of those gaps, and you have to fill them in one drawing at a time for every frame of film. So when I worked in traditional animation, you had to draw a picture, 24 pictures for every second that's on the screen. That is a long process. It's why it usually takes about 4 years to make an animated movie. And each of those, and I don't know if you've noticed, I would read comic book adaptations of movies. Like in Raiders of the Lost Ark, you have this giant truck chase sequence in the middle of the desert, and it goes on. It's like 15 minutes in the movie, and it's action-packed every second. And in the comic book, it's 3 panels. I mean, it's literally half a page, because you can't just, if you draw cars just running along, like racing along the highway, they're not racing in a comic book. There's just still. It's not that quite exciting to read a car chase.
Sure, very much so, yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting to watching what the writers and the artists would choose to accentuate in a movie adaptation of a comic book. You ever kind of look at those two things?
Sure, absolutely.
No, and I love it when they get it right, because it is a translation. It's something that's different, and it takes finesse to kind of bring apart the pacing of the film.
Sure. But
pacing it at a different.
Well,
place.
It's interesting because historically, traditionally, people who are doing movie adaptations have not actually watched the movie.
Yeah.
They're working just from the shooting script and from a couple of stills. Like literally like a couple of pictures, and they have to draw the whole comic book that's the adaptation of the movie, which is, it seems to me, quite a trick in a lot of cases.
And I love that because you would see all these deleted scenes from the film.
Sure.
I think the Star Wars adaptation was my favorite for that. Like the Jabba the Hutt sequence that was deleted was in the comic book. And my friends were like, there was never that scene. And I was like, yes, there was. And I saw it. And I think my dad and I actually just took me to a preview screening of it. And I would tell them, no, there's this scene. It's in the film. And it was in the preview. But it wasn't in the theatrical release. And for like 20 years, my friends were telling me I was nuts.
And I saw a preview in New York. And it also had the scene where he goes into town and talks to Biggs.
Yes.
And I was telling my friends about that for years. They're like, that's not in the movie. And I saw it like 35 years ago, something like that, in a preview,
I actually like that scene. It really set up the relationship at the end, and it made it more emotional. But
we're talking like old people, though.
Yeah, sorry about that.
So,
and they're like, where's George?
With the Marvel comics and stuff, since it was comics before, I usually like those, like the car chases in those comics, because they made the comics before the movie.
Sure. Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. It's not that you can't do a car chase. It's just that it's hard to sustain for many pages, in a comic. So
what was a good car chase in a comic book you read?
I really don't know. I just remember liking the car chases in comic books.
Is there a particular comic that had cars in it that were?
No,
that was awesome.
There's just a lot of comics that have car chases in them.
Very good.
They're cool.
So
were they talking cars, like Speed Buggy, or like transforming cars, like Transformers?
No, probably not.
They didn't turn into giant robots. Okay.
Well, giant robots are cool.
They are. They're always cool.
So you worked in animation. I saw on your webpage that you've taught school.
Oh, wow! Thank you.
You gotta sort of do a little bit of research when you do an interview. A little bit. So how did these experiences? How did it get you to a place where you pitched a comic book? How did that come together?
that's a really long story. This idea was this.
That's what an interview's for.
Do you want to start with the story itself, or
Sure,
how it became a comic?
Yeah, start with the story itself.
So when I first, my family's from Hawaii. My dad was born there, and my grandparents came over here for a job in Palo Alto, working at Lockheed when my dad was about 10 years old. So I'm the first native Californian in my family. And after my grandfather retired, he went back to Hawaii. So my first visit to visit them after they retired, they picked me up at the Honolulu. Anyone here been to Hawaii? Anyone?
Ooh,
Nice.
like-
Oh, all right.
Yeah,
Yes.
like more than half, 3/4? Yeah, that's pretty cool.
What islands have you been to? Do you remember?
Honolulu and the Big Island.
Nice. I love the Big Island.
I've been to, I think, Maui and the Big Island. I don't know, or the Honolulu.
Honolulu.
Yeah.
I've been to Kauai, Oahu, and
Wow, you've been to more places than I have. That is
I think I've been to Maui.
okay. Great. So you'll recognize some places in the book. On Oahu, if you go over to a drive from Honolulu Airport to Kailua, which is on the windward side, there is this highway called the Pali Highway. We're driving along it, and we see a broken down truck on the side of the road. And my grandfather sees I've got a sandwich. I got a late flight. There was nothing open. I grabbed a sandwich out of a vending machine. He looked at me and said, "Kent, that better not be a ham sandwich. What kind of sandwich is that?" I said, "No, it's turkey." "Oh, good, great. Don't want the car to break down." "Why would the car break down if this was a ham sandwich?" "Oh, because you can't bring pork over the Pali Highway. Everybody knows that." I went, "Oh, of course. Well, I'm glad I picked up. Why can't you bring pork over the Pali Highway?" And he said, I don't know. And we stop at the 7-Eleven down at the bottom of the Pali, and 7-Elevens there is great, by the way. If anyone goes to 7-Eleven in Hawaii, you have to go get the musubis there and the honey, what's it, I'm blanking on the white bun, you know those, they call them char siu here, but they're the best, the manapua. The manapua is the best at 7-Eleven in Hawaii. And I asked him because, well, he looks like he's been there forever. He knows everybody comes off the Pali. "Why can't you bring pork over the Pali Highway?" And he's like, I don't know. Everyone knows that, but I don't know. And so this book came out of me researching why you can't bring pork over the Pali Highway.
There you go.
And so that was phase one of how this book came about. The second thing that hit me was I was on a trip, went to the Big Island, found out that Madame Pele, the volcano goddess, would occasionally either disguise herself as a small white dog, or she had a small white dog that would be strays. And if you found a dog on the island, you better treat it nicely and take care of it and take it into your house, because then Madame Pele would be nice to you, and you'd have crops and you'd have fields grow nicely. If you were mean to the dog, your town got wiped out by lava. And that was like a little bit of an ethics test to see if you're nice to them. So that sparked an idea where I thought, what if she was still doing that today? And could we bring this into modern times? What would it look like for a couple of kids to adopt a stray white dog and bring them into the house with all of our modern craziness going on in homes and toasters? And that seemed like a fun idea. And I originally pitched that as an animated film. It got shot down, but that's when Scott found me and said, "Hey, Kent, why don't we turn your movie idea into a comic book?"
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. And so at that point, what did you do? Did you just sit down and write it? Or did you already have a script? Just a treatment? What did you have at that point?
So at that point, I had something that was a little... The idea was more funny kind of thing. And then I remembered back to the Pali Highway story. And when I started doing research into both Pele's background as to who she was and to how that, and I accidentally stumbled across a connection between the Pali Highway, the pork over the Pali Highway, and Pele. And the two of those together started coming up with themes. I had themes for the main character. And I had worked in, I'd seen a lot of animated films. I love all of them. I loved what we worked on. I used to work at Disney, if that was so. And we had all these kids who were orphans, right? All of our, I was saying, like, all the main characters were orphans, or they lost one parent, and growing up from a typical California household, I grew up with parents who were separated. And I said, I've never seen a movie about a kid who comes from a situation like me. And we have a lot of complicated, family situations now. And I wanted to write something that was the main character could understand that, and kind of some of those, difficult family dynamics you grew up with and try to deal with, and connected to these themes of gods and goddesses from Hawaii. And as I looked at their lives, they had pretty crazy family lives too. So that's, all those things started gelling together to create what this is. It was, I like pulling things from a lot of different areas. That's why I think it comes from that DC Comics, the multiverse thing, the first thing I jumped into. It's 2 worlds, 2 Earths, 2 Flashes, like all these. And then you have this giant mythology to play with and kind of connect to and bring together. And the Hawaiian culture was like that. There's a history of talking story and adding to it. So, and my process was, I go on long bike rides. And when I go on a bike ride, everything starts settling down, and ideas just start coming into my head. So. So I would tend to spend months, like weeks and months, doing that. And then I write everything all at once. In one weekend.
Really? So did you write this in one weekend?
This was originally a 4-issue miniseries. So I wrote each issue pretty much. The first issue was extra long, took me about 10 days. The other 3 issues, each one took me probably 10 to 20 hours in the first draft, and then I would do a rewrite. And every time I write by hand, pencil on paper the first time around. Then it forces me to go back and retype the whole, because I'll kind of spit bits and pieces at first, like a few pages here, a few pages there. And then when I sit down and retype the whole thing all at once, it makes me look at it all in one setting, and I get the flow and the pacing down a lot better. And I retype everything. So
the whole book took you 3 weeks to write?
It really took me about 2 years to put together. But like actual time I was sitting,
the actual sitting down part and doing it, No, because I know obviously ideas have to gestate and take time and grow. Wow, that's cool. That's super cool. Did you?
It was a long,
Did you have a question? You have another question?
Sorry. Yes.
I
Question.
just realized that story you just told was in the back of the ham sandwich.
Yes, it is. I decided to write the ham sandwich into the book because I was so inspired by it.
Very cool.
Thank you. What's your name? I'm sorry.
Palmer, P-A-L-M-E-R.
Palmer. Thank you for noticing. Appreciate that. Good job. That's awesome.
Was there a challenge for you writing for something that that's static rather than that's moving? Was that a hard gear to shift in your brain?
Not at all.
No, okay.
Not at all. So in my head, I actually plotted this for animation, if that makes sense. Like I could kind of see, when I'm riding my bike, I always have, like I said, voices, soundtracks, and there are sequences in there I would just love to see. Like in 3D animation, towards the end, the whole skiing and the giants and the lava and the fire, and you could just see all that action happening. And I would write down everything kind of like you would for a regular script, because I didn't know how to plot for a comic book. And Scott just said, let Diego do all the pacing. Trust him, give him the dialogue. And he paced it out wonderfully. Half my script is gone because I would look at Diego's pages. I don't need all this dialogue. I can throw this away. Less of me, more of the art. That's what everyone wants. And it was a really neat collaborative process that way. Like I learned, wow, this is great. I didn't know you could do this in comics, and Diego can just think about how to place this and where it should be on the page. And
yeah, exactly. No, that's what the artist. That's sort of the flow. Their job. So, how did you hook up with the publisher, with Alternative?
So I had done a very semi-lackluster black and white version of this myself, and I was shopping it around stores.
Okay.
And Mark was at Wow Cool Comics in Cupertino, was right close to my house, and he agreed to carry it, and he read it, and he said, well, "This is pretty good, but I think we need some professional lettering." My lettering was first time letterer. I mean, it wasn't horrible, but it wasn't pro.
Okay.
And then I had met and then he said, color would really help this as well. And I had worked on an animated short with Anthony Williams, who up in Sacramento, I was up there. He was my colleague from Disney, and we said, "Hey, you're back in. We're in the same town." He said, "Hey, let's do a short together, just for old time's sake." And we put together this movie, Freestyle, which actually has made it to a number of film festivals. We were down at Sony Studios and we're one of very few 2D animated. There weren't that many of them lined up, but one of the other ones with our short was Glenn Keane's Deer Basketball. Okay. So it was kind of like, wow, we're looking at the lineup. It's Anthony Williams and Glenn Keane. I'm like, I can't believe we're there. It's great. Our storyboard and layout artist was available to do the colors for this. She had never colored comics before, Justine. And I said, Justine, do you want to give this a try? I think you've got a great sense of color and palettes, and she knocked it out of the park.
Yeah, no,
Mark,
it's really
Mark
nice.
was.
So it's interesting. So this was originally designed for black and white.
It was.
You're saying, oh, okay. And when you say you did a version of it yourself, was it like a print-on-demand book, that kind of thing, or were you talking like photocopies?
Oh, I went to a print shop up in Sacramento where we were at, and they did some normal size comic book printing. So I printed up about 100, 150 copies.
Like a real small number of copies. Yeah. Okay. That's cool.
And they went out. And they had a couple of them at the bookshop in Oahu, where my grandmother lives. So thanks to her pull, they actually carried them on Hawaii.
Nice. That's very nice.
So that was the first place you could buy it. That was
yeah, that's very cool. That's very cool. Do any of you guys have any questions about the book? About things that happen in it, about characters? There's one in the back. Yes, you.
Yes.
How did you come up with the names of the characters?
A lot of the names were given to me by Hawaiian myth, but Tamino is named after a opera. Do you know? Are you familiar?
I'm not.
It's called The Magic Flute.
Oh, yes.
And that's also tied to my grandfather. I played Tamino in The Magic Flute when I was in high school. My grandfather built for me, carved a sword from wood from his wood shop in the back. And I still have it. It's this great sword. So it just seemed like an offbeat name and kind of a fun one to use. And then Tamara actually just made sense with Tamino. They just sounded good together. What was your name? What's your name? Arden. Arden? And
what character did you like the best?
Yeah.
Arden?
Who'd you like?
Okay. You don't have to like someone best. It's fine. You had a question?
I do have stories for the other names.
Sure. Yeah. If you have more, go. Please tell it.
Porthos, the zombie mouse. So he was a kind of a fun gag that my animation class came up with for one of their projects, and I made him as an homage to the first animation class I ever taught. Ilio was not too inventive. That really is Hawaiian for dog. So
cool.
That was
pretty cool.
Any other names you were curious about?
Cool.
Okay, so why is this? So the story in the beginning. Why is Tamino in this story? Why is this relevant to him?
That is so. If you've been to Hawaii. Have you been to the Pali Lookout, the Nu'uano? So where that takes place, the actual spot where Kamehameha won the islands, is another huge inspiration for this story. I can't actually put that in the comic book, but if you stand on those cliffs, you will feel something. You will experience hundreds, thousands of years of history above this majestic site. And it was just such an inspiration for me. I felt like that was a great place. And it was a great kind of start to the story. It kind of gets you into the mythology and the history in an action-packed way. So I wanted to have like a bit of an action to it.
Mm-hmm.
And later on, when you get to the part where Tamino is talking to the shark god, there's a reason for why he went through that.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, it plays into the sequel.
Very good.
What's your name?
Lucia, how
Lucy.
did you come up with the masks? The masks.
That is all Diego. Diego, I said, Menehunis, they're little people, and Diego just ran with that. He loved the tiki concepts. If you notice, there's a little M right in this,
Yeah.
and they're based on traditional tiki masks, like.
Oh.
Super
But
cool.
yeah, no, he did all the character designs. A couple of times. That was another interesting story.
Yeah?
He had, I actually have a few samples of the table of the original character. So there was the character designs you see in the comic right now. And then he went away and then decided, he kind of went through that artistic inspiration and changed everything up and went with completely different designs. That made the characters look, it was good, but they made them look really younger.
Okay.
Like they were 7 or 8 rather than 13, 14.
Right.
And I was like, oh, well, I mean, I was getting that feedback, like, how old are these kids supposed to be? Because they look like they're 8 years old. And I bump into Scott Shaw at a party. Do you know who Scott Shaw
I
is?
do know who Scott Shaw is.
So and I said, would you mind looking at these 2 different character designs and tell me which one you like better?
Mm-hmm.
Because I know Diego's a huge Captain Carrot fan.
Right.
Whatever Scott says,
Sure.
Diego's. So and Scott said, "Oh, I like these designs are like way better."
Right.
And so I sent that back to Diego and said, "Okay, I'll go with the first designs."
Cool.
Okay.
That's cool.
So I had Captain Carrot help me with
That's very cool.
art direction.
When it came to the mythic and the historical stuff, were there any places, in the design process that were? Did you do a bunch of research for him? Did he do the research himself? How did that work?
Well, I researched some Hawaiian art, and I sent him a number of resources he could reference from it. Mm-hmm. But he's also familiar with the area and the culture. He visits Easter Island. Rapa Nui is one of his vacation spots.
Yeah.
So he had a slightly different but close perspective on things, which I really enjoyed. There was there's always a cultural sensitivity type of thing you want to, because I know I'm messing with people's history here. I am, and I get that. I'm being playful with it, but in a respectful way, I hope. And I asked, and I think Diego understands that when he brought his interpretations to them.
Cool.
I think
Were there any characters that you guys liked better than others? Oh, silence. I guess they liked everything equally.
Really.
That's awesome.
I have a question. What did you guys think of Tamara? Did she? Yes.
I liked her personality because she's like very positive and she's like, yeah, let's do this and that and blah blah. So yeah, I like her personality. It's like very positive.
Cool. Anyone else like her at all? Arden?
I think she's a bit of a know-it-all.
Oh, really?
Because she keeps telling him off for doing things where he's perfectly normal, like killing the gecko in the house and
Like-
stuff like that.
Oh, wow, that's an interesting read. Tamino was supposed to be the know-it-all in this stuffy one.
You
That's
never
a
know how
good-
the audience is going to react.
Wow. Yeah, that was another real story too. I saw a gecko in our kitchen, and my grandmother was like, "Don't kill them. They're good luck. Don't get rid of him."
They're super cute too.
They are. They're very cute.
I remember that. I remember that when we went to Hawaii, that there were always geckos coming into the living room, cutest little things. And yeah, they're cool.
She was. I had the toughest time with her character.
Yeah.
She was the least defined starting out.
Right.
And there's always, in writing, you always kind of have a reflection. You have a main character who has a big story arc, and then he has these people around him who help him through the story. And she was supposed to be the better person, like aspects of the main character that he's lacking.
Mm-hmm.
And through it, and I hate that because somebody starts out being a plot device rather than a person.
Yeah.
And it was tough to find her voice, but at the end, I met a couple of other people who had been they were living in Hawaii. They had been transplants, though, and kind of that they were positive. But the reason they're so positive is because they're outsiders. They're always fighting to be accepted, and they're always fighting to fit in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of why Tamara is so positive, is that she's always trying to fit in because she's an outsider. Anyway,
that makes sense. That makes sense. When you were doing the research for the book, were there any myths or stories that you encountered that you wanted to include but couldn't fit into the book?
There are so many. There are multiple versions of the myths that are in here. I kind of had to pick one to go with, as far as the site. There's another one that's if you want to get a heads up on part 2. There's a nod to it in here where Pele brings an egg over, and it's her littlest sister, Hi'iaka. Mm-hmm. And there is a whole tale behind Pele and Hi'iaka that you should read and find out. It is crazy. It is the most sister jealousy tale, romantic triangle I've ever read, and it will play heavily into if we get it book 2.
Awesome.
But I love that one. And I'm trying to think what else. No, but everything else kind of fit. Everything else that I bumped into, was amazing how well these stories connected together, which really inspired me to make the book all the more. It was almost like it was meant to be. There were a couple of mysteries in Hawaiian myth that I attempted to solve.
Right.
And they came out. And,
Yeah, no. Yeah. I mean, one of the things that I like the best about comics is that it can teach you about other cultures and other places that you haven't necessarily been to or don't have a connection to. Were there, for you guys in the audience, were there parts of this that you were like, that sounds really cool, I want to learn more about this? No?
No? Is it? Something else I thought that was great about this, and I love Middle Earth, I love Lord of the Rings, but I can never actually go there.
Yeah.
You've all been to Hawaii. You can go to these places. You can experience these stories and add to them and make them part of your. Yeah. And I thought that was an exciting part of the story.
Yeah. So you said you have a second part that you're considering doing. Mm-hmm. Is it gonna be a summer again?
Yes.
Yeah.
It's my summer as a junior ghost warrior.
A junior ghost warrior.
Yes.
That sounds cool.
Yeah. If you caught the whole night marchers thing, if they grab you, they make you one of them.
Right.
Yeah. Tamino ends up really in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. That sounds fun.
Yes.
Would you guys like to see a sequel?
Yes.
And,
see, that's good. That's good to know that you're the target audience. They want more.
Do you want to see more? Do you want it? Do you want it? Because everything's just starting up, so it's.
Yeah.
Do you want to?
Well, I think that's great.
Yeah.
Very good. Are we having technical problems? No, we're not having. Okay.
So if you can figure out someone becomes a ghost warrior and it has to do with Pele and Hi'iaka, and let your imaginations run wild. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And it all ties in together. And there's another small hint in the book where, if you notice, all the Menehune are afraid of the dog, but they're not normally afraid of a dog. They're normally afraid of something else. And you should research that.
Okay. There's a question.
Another hint. Yes.
Thanks for being here and thanks for hosting these. It's really cool.
Yeah.
I was
Thank
wondering if you could talk about the source. You were talking about, is it north of Beckwith?
Yes. That was one of the books that I.
You said that I think that was kind of the
N-
or
No.
suggest that?
There's Pele and Hiyaka is another book that was recently redone as a graphic adaptation
Okay.
that I picked up as well. And I can't think of the name of the author off the top of my head, but it's a wonderful book, and I'll refer it to
Okay.
you so you can carry
Yeah.
it here. That
Great.
was and that's a great book to start with. The other ones I could think of that would be good. Wow, it's really tough. Most of the research I did was decades ago and a little dry, little literary or educational-ish.
Now, are
But
these
it was-
myths
but it was great.
are these myths typically handed down as oral traditions? Is that right? Or
Yes. And one of the prefaces to the book, and it wasn't the Beckwith book, it was the Hiyaka book, but the author said he was at a time in the early 20th century where we knew that Western culture was going to start overriding everything that had come before. And there was a tradition of oral history handed down through generations. And before that history got tweaked and changed by pop culture, he wanted to record for posterity the reality as best he could, what that was. And even that was a compendium of different stories, talking just as we are right now. But
Yeah, can you guys imagine if the only way that you knew about history and things that had happened was by people telling you stories, and then you had to memorize those stories so that you'd be able to repeat them someday to your own children? Doesn't that seem kind of complicated? And today, like, we're so lucky we can pull up our telephones and just type stuff in and find out all kinds of things. But in all these other societies, you know, they actually, that's how they moved their culture along, was by telling one another stories. And I think in a lot of ways that comics are sort of today's version of that. You know, rather than telling a story orally, we're putting it into a picture book like this. And the great thing about comics is, as you all know, is that you put yourselves in the story as much, and you control how the story is read. That's probably too convoluted, but that's what I think, at least.
no, that's not convoluted at all.
Another question.
And in Hawaii, you also told story through dance.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I was nice to incorporate that into the
Yeah.
book.
Yeah.
That is real. So if you wanted to learn the story of Pele, you learned a hula.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Did you have you had another question?
Yeah, well, I was just wondering on that sort of topic, you know, like it sounds like you're saying a lot of the research was pretty scholarly research and all of that, and I was just wondering if you could speak to social media and, you know, how you would like to use social media, if you like using it, etc. We were trying to look you up, but
I am horribly shy, actually. I think it comes back to being a nerdy kid who was picked upon and nobody liked me in school, so I don't do social media because I figure nobody will like me on the internet either. So this is a very difficult challenge for me to be here today.
You're doing very well.
So
You're doing great.
And-
He's doing great, right? Yeah.
yeah, to the point I use social media, I like to encourage all my artistic friends, and they all have their fantastic projects. I got onto Facebook because my grandmother's on Facebook. She's 93, and she is posting every day, and she has legions of followers around the world. You know, Edna Silvera, look her up. She'll find these images of old Hawaii from when she was growing up, like in 1910, and then she'll write a little story. This is the malt shut I used to work at. This is where I used to ride the trolley from Eva Beach over to, and she's just got people from halfway around the world. That's so cool, and I can't believe you live there, and what amazing stories you have. Jeez. And so I had to get on Facebook.
Yeah, I think that's the first time I've ever heard someone say that their grandmother got them onto Facebook rather than the other way around. That's super cool.
But-
two Instagram accounts for you.
Yeah. My students made me get those so I could look up their artwork after they finished my class. They would get Instagram accounts, and I would let me look you up on Instagram, and so I'm sorry I don't post there very often. I'm camera phobic too. I think you always hear these, like, when I go to talk shows, I'd see actors. I think Johnny Depp said this. He's like, my kids have seen more of my movies than I have,
Right.
because he can't stand watching himself
Seeing
on
himself,
this. Yeah.
I don't really usually watch these things myself either,
Yeah.
because I'm funny. I do.
Yeah.
Do you?
Nice.
Thank you, Jordan.
I have to, though,
I know someone watches them at least. If you were to give a suggestion or a recommendation to one of these guys or one of the viewers who were thinking about writing comics of their own, or maybe even just learning more about a culture, what would you recommend?
Go there. So much of my research was just, over the years, I've had the privilege and opportunity to go to Hawaii every year and make friends there and meet people and talk to the local shops and visit the museum. Go to the Bishop Museum. If you love Hawaii, that's another great reference. You've just got to meet people. Go to the local. If you love skateboarding, go to the local skate parks. If you love ultimate frisbee like I do, play ultimate frisbee at tournaments in the town that you want to visit, and I guarantee you they will connect you with local. But anyone here play frisbee? Play ultimate frisbee? I have a couple. Oh, nice, excellent. We have a couple. I have a couple of frisbees to give away today. Lucky you came. But that was another big source for me. There's this great tournament there in November, and we played for 2 days on the Waimanalo polo fields. And the third day is beach ultimate, and they play on the beach at Waimanalo Beach Park, which is the best place to go body surfing in the planet. If you love body surfing, you have to go there. Watch out for the jellyfish.
Okay.
But it's just south of Kailua, and we'll play right up against the water. And they'll play that if the disc lands in the water, it's still alive. So everyone swims out to get it and tries to hammer it back into the field, and it's the best game in the world. I had to plug Ultimate there.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good.
And so that would be travel and go. If you can't travel so much, meet someone from there. Take them out, play with them. Go out for tea, go out for coffee, go out for social media connection point at the Wi-Fi spot. Whatever. And there's plenty of culture here in San Francisco. Everybody comes here from all over the world, which was something else I loved about Honolulu. Yeah. It was like going to a different country. You've got Japan, you've got Asia, you've got Australia, you've got the Portuguese, which was, my family came from there. Yeah. And I'm sure talk about cultural influence, my grandmother always wants me to plug this. Her great-grandfather was the Joao Fernandez. Okay. He invented the ukulele. Oh, brought really? It. Yes. Wow. He was actually so there was an engineer type on the boat coming over from Portugal to work the sugarcane fields in Hawaii, and they were bored and they were putting together this little plinking instrument. And so he didn't actually build it, but he told the guy building it like what to do to make the sound right, and he was the first person to really play it. That's cool. You can Wikipedia him. That's
super cool.
I only know how to play my music, my iPod.
Very good.
I'm learning guitar.
Do any of you guys have any last questions? Right up in the front.
Okay, so this doesn't really work out. These tiki god thingies. Mm-hmm. So she has a dog, and these people are scared of dogs, and they serve her. So it doesn't. I don't understand that.
That is actually addressed in the sequel, and hopefully I'll get enough interest in another book that we'll be able to make that, and I will answer that question for you.
All right. It's a mystery.
It is a mystery.
Very good.
It's a mystery that has. I'm gonna fess up. That was a bit of a. Like I said, they're not typically afraid of dogs, but they're afraid of Ilio. And I found that out that they're afraid of birds midway through writing the book, but I couldn't really change my grand plan because I'd already done the whole root beer blowing up and
Yeah.
dog chasing him. But that was one of those amazing coincidences. I did some more research and it all works.
Cool.
There's a cool revelation there.
I love the fact that you're always
Yeah.
editing these books.
Yes.
This is
and it
the
should be.
second time, or maybe it's the third time that you've done that. And I think it's just great that you're giving everything such a close read and you're paying so much attention that you're like, this part doesn't make sense. Tell me why this doesn't make sense. Fix it for me. I love it. I think that's great, man. That's the right way to read a book. Yeah.
It
I
is.
have one last question. I was just wondering if you could talk about,
What?
since you did a lot of this research a long time ago, like just the explosion in graphic novels and what you think about it and what other authors you think would be great for kids, like other work that you admire, stuff like that.
What is your name?
My name is
Please?
Kelly.
Kelly? Oh, great name. That is a great question. Like I said, Scott Sava got me interested in this, and Scott also learned how to do graphic. He was an animator. He was learning graphic illustration by taking a course from Mike Kunkel. And Mike Kunkel's book, Hero Bear and the Kid, it's right over there. You should check that out.
Fantastic book.
Yeah, Mike. Do you know Mike? Have you?
I've never met him, no,
He's-
but I admire his work, yeah.
Yeah, we used to ride the train together to work. That's how I met Mike.
Uh-huh.
And he was, I think in a lot of ways that book was the forerunner of the graphic novel boom, especially for kids. And they were he was originally doing that as a single issue, one at a time book. And he did a lot of independents, the first issue comes out, great. The second issue comes out a month, the next month, maybe 6 weeks later.
Right.
The third issue takes about 5 or 6 months, maybe 8. Issue 4 was like a year, and issue 5 was like a year and a half after that.
Yeah.
And when we looked at doing My Summer as part of their company, Astonish Factory, Mike said to me, you know what? We need all your books finished before we publish issue 1. Learned our lesson. We're I think that would be the right way to go. And I was glad that they said that, because it gave me the ability to tell a longer story in one shot. There are things at the beginning that tie into the end that I think if you had done those in separate issues, kids may have missed an issue or dropped something off. And I love the decompression. I saw your interview with Ghosts, and I bought that. I read that through to watch your interview, and I love how there's so much more room to tell each panel and each story in those reaction shots. You don't have to condense things into such a small space. And what do you guys think of that? Is that more fun to read something that's 100 pages in one shot, or did you like the sequential things?
I don't really mind either way.
Either way.
How many, just out of curiosity, how many of you guys read individually published comics? Like the kind with staples? None of you. Oh, it's like iffy. We have 3 iffies, which means you've read a couple maybe, but all the rest of you only read books, graphic novels, right? Yeah. See, that's the way it's changing. And I love it. Actually, I love the fact that it's changing.
I love the fact that I never have to worry about my comic getting canceled, me not being able to find out the ending. I'm sure that was maddening in some ways. I love, if something's a complete story, I do love reading it all the way through. Sometimes you want chapter by chapter and that anticipation, that suspense. But for the most part, I think it's great to just get lost in something and go right through it. And I think it's good for kids. I think I'd like to see attention spans last a little bit longer. I love Teen Titans Go, but I love the original Teen Titans show a lot too. And when you invest in somebody, when you give time to them, when their story becomes your story and you're connected to it, and that happens over a matter of days and maybe weeks sometimes rather than just minutes, then when you get to that ending, it's a lot more powerful. It's a lot more meaningful. I think it stays with you. Some of these books have stayed with me my whole life. Lord of the Rings, The Chronicles of Narnia. I remember loving the original Legion of Superheroes Earth War saga, which is probably the first multi-part comic book I really read. And that was, the grand. But the trick is, can you paint on a grand scale that long, but make it about people? and characters and connect the audience
Yeah.
to not just the action.
Yeah.
And I hope, did you guys get anything out of the book? What did you think? Like personally? Was there? Do you like these characters? Are they people you wanna see again?
Well, yeah, I mean, they were pretty
Yeah,
unanimous that they
yeah.
wanted to read more.
Nice.
So that's good, you know.
What did you think of Pele?
Those. I thought it was a really good touch that you didn't make her talk
Thank you.
because it just made her a lot more scary and a lot more mysterious and more like the kind of person the kind of person you need her to be because she didn't talk.
It's an excellent
Yeah.
observation.
That is. I'm really impressed. Yes.
I like how she's always mad at Tamino except in this last shot and she's like always mad. I like that.
Yeah, she has a fiery temper. She's known for that. Yes.
Just a little bit.
Just
Explosively fired. Well, very good. I'm really glad that we had a chance to talk about this book, and I'm really glad that you guys enjoyed it, and that you want to see more. So yeah, I think that's the questions I have. Nobody else has any more questions? Yeah. All right. Well, then I'm going to say thank you very much for coming out. The book was
Mahalo.
Mahalo. Yeah. Okay.
For having me.
Yeah. What's the proper response to mahalo though?
That's a good question. Just aloha. Just
Okay. All right. Okay.
Mahalo nui.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Thank
Okay.
you.
The book was My Summer with the Hawaiian Fire Goddess. It's for those of you watching at home, it is published by Alternative Comics, so it may be a little tricky to find. But if you ask your local comic book store, they should be able to get a copy for you. It's really worth tracking it down. We loved it a lot.
Come here.
You can come here too. Yeah, absolutely.
Right
Yeah,
here.
we have it. Absolutely.
First in the country. This won't actually be on shelves till May.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. We got it early.
We printed it just for you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We forced some copies out, which was good. And so thank you for coming out. Thank you for the book. And I certainly hope that we get a sequel and we get another one. It was great stuff.
Thank you for having me so much. It's
thank
an
you
honor.
for coming out. Thank you. And thank
I-
you all for coming out. Next month's book, I actually have a copy of it somewhere. I don't have to show you. It's called Mega Robo Bros, and it's about these two brothers who fight with each other, and they're also robots. And it's really cool. I think you're going to like it a lot. Next month, the book is the author is in England, and so we're not going to be able to have him in person. So it's going to be one of those ones where we set up a TV screen and we interview them on the TV screen. So I hope you guys can come out for that too, because it's a great book. Thank you all for coming. This was the Graphic Novel Month Club for the month, and if you just hang out for a second, we'll get to the signing and stuff. Okay. Yay!
Yay!
All right. So.